On the night Maggie Sullivan saw her first firefly in 27 years, she was sitting on the porch of a house that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The old farmhouse had been scheduled for demolition 3 times, survived 2 fires, and outlasted 4 generations of Sullivans who swore they'd never come back. Welcome back to Lantern Lake Stories. Tonight, we're heading down a long gravel road where the kudzu grows thick and the past never quite stays buried. This is a story about going home when home doesn't want you, and finding light in places you thought had gone dark forever. Maggie had driven for 11 hours straight, stopping only twice for gas station coffee that tasted like regret and cardboard. Her hands were still tight on an invisible steering wheel even though she'd been parked in the overgrown driveway for 30 minutes now. The rental car's engine ticked as it cooled, a rhythmic sound that reminded her of her grandmother's old mantel clock, the one that used to count down the minutes until bedtime when she was small. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Isn't that always the way? The places that loom so large in our childhood shrink when we return with adult eyes. But there was something else too, something she couldn't quite name. The 2-story farmhouse with its wraparound porch and peeling white paint seemed to be waiting. Not welcoming exactly, but not hostile either. Just waiting. She'd received the letter 3 weeks ago. Heavy cream-colored paper, the expensive kind that people don't use anymore. Her name written in her Aunt Caroline's spidery handwriting. The message was brief. The house is yours now if you want it. I'm too old to fight anymore. Come home, Maggie, while there's still time. Time for what? Aunt Caroline hadn't said. The June evening was thick and warm, the kind of heat that doesn't so much press down on you as wrap around you like a living thing. Maggie could hear the cicadas starting their nightly symphony, that rising and falling buzz that sounds like the earth breathing. In Chicago, where she'd lived for the past 15 years, summer sounded different. Car horns and sirens, and the constant hum of humanity pressing in from all sides. Here, the sounds had spaces between them. Room to breathe, room to think, maybe too much room. She finally opened the car door and stepped out onto the gravel. Her city shoes, sensible flats, she'd worn to the law firm that morning before calling in sick and making the impulsive decision to drive south, crunched against the stones. Each step toward the porch stairs felt like walking backward through time. The key was exactly where Aunt Caroline had said it would be, under the 3rd flower pot from the left, the blue one with the chip in the rim. Maggie's fingers found it easily, muscle memory guiding her to the spot, even though she hadn't looked for that key since she was 17 years old. Since the summer, everything changed. Since the summer she swore she'd never come back. The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the empty rooms beyond. Maggie stepped inside and was immediately hit with the smell of the past. Old wood and dust, and something else, something sweeter. Honeysuckle maybe, drifting in through the open windows. Aunt Caroline had obviously been here recently, airing the place out. The furniture was covered in white sheets, turning the familiar living room into a landscape of ghosts. Maggie didn't uncover anything. Not yet. Instead, she walked through the house like a stranger, relearning the geography of her childhood. The kitchen with its ancient farmhouse sink and the window that looked out over the vegetable garden, now overrun with weeds and wildflowers. The dining room where Sunday suppers used to stretch on for hours, 3 generations passing bowls of mashed potatoes and green beans and stories. The narrow hallway with the floorboard creaking, the one she used to avoid when sneaking out to meet Tommy Richardson down by the creek. Tommy. God, she hadn't thought about him in years. Deliberately hadn't thought about him. The stairs to the 2nd floor were darker, the evening light not quite reaching into the heart of the house. Maggie's hand found the banister, worn smooth by 100 years of Sullivan hands. She climbed slowly. At the top, 5 doors. For bedrooms and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that had always reminded Maggie of a beached whale. Her old room was the 2nd on the left. She knew before she opened the door that it would be exactly as she'd left it. The door opened, and Maggie stood very still, her breath catching in her throat. The bed was still covered in the faded quilt her grandmother had made, a log cabin pattern in blues and yellows. The bookshelf still held her collection of Nancy Drew mysteries and the complete works of Emily Dickinson. The desk under the window still had the water stain from where she'd left a glass sitting too long one humid August afternoon. And on the nightstand, covered in a fine layer of dust, was the mason jar. Empty now, but Maggie could still remember when it had been full of light. She crossed the room without meaning to, drawn to that jar like a moth to flame. Her fingers closed around the cool glass, and she lifted it, holding it up to the dying light from the window. "I let them all go," she whispered to the empty room. The night she'd left, the jar had held maybe 200 fireflies, their collective glow bright enough to read by. She'd collected them obsessively that summer, her last summer in Firefly Hollow. Every evening she'd go out with the jar and wander the fields and woods, catching the little beetles of light and keeping them like treasures. Tommy used to tease her about it, said she was trying to bottle up the summer so it would never end. He'd been more right than he knew. The night everything fell apart, the night her parents drove away and didn't come back, the night the state trooper came to the door with his hat in his hands and his eyes full of sorrow, Maggie had opened that jar. She'd stood on the back porch, numb and hollow, and unscrewed the lid. The fireflies had hesitated for a moment, as if they couldn't quite believe they were free. Then they'd risen in a cloud of golden light and scattered across the darkness, winking out one by one until she was standing alone in the dark. She'd never seen another firefly after that night. Not one. Even when she came back for the funeral, when she spent 2 terrible days in this house surrounded by casseroles and condolences, the summer evening had stayed dark. People said it was just a bad year for lightning bugs, that the population went through cycles. But Maggie had known better. The light had gone out of Firefly Hollow, and it was her fault for letting it go. The tears came without warning, hot and fast, blurring the room into watercolor streaks. Maggie set the jar down carefully and sank onto the edge of the bed, letting herself cry for the first time since she'd gotten Aunt Caroline's letter. Maybe for the first time in years. She cried for her parents, gone too soon and too suddenly. She cried for her younger self, the girl who'd loved this place and these hills, and the boy who used to catch fireflies with her in the summer dark. She cried for all the years she'd stayed away, telling herself it was too painful to come back, when really she'd been too scared to face what she'd lost. How long she sat there, she didn't know. But gradually, the tears slowed and stopped, and the tight feeling in her chest loosened just a little. The room had grown darker. Through the window, she could see the first stars appearing in a sky the color of bruises and slate. Maggie wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up. She should bring in her suitcase from the car, see if the water was still turned on, figure out something for dinner. But instead, she found herself walking back downstairs and out onto the front porch, drawn by something she couldn't name. The quilt was still there, the one she'd noticed earlier, folded neatly over the porch swing. She picked it up and wrapped it around her shoulders, then sat down on the swing and set it into gentle motion with her foot. The chains creaked softly, a sound that was as much a part of this house as the walls and the roof. The night was settling in for real now, the darkness pooling in the low places and rising like water. The cicadas had reached their full chorus, joined now by crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl from the woods that bordered the eastern edge of the property. She let her eyes drift closed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The swing rocked gently, and for just a moment, she could almost imagine she was 10 years old again, could almost hear her grandmother's voice humming some old hymn from inside the house, could almost believe that when she opened her eyes, her parents would be pulling up the driveway, back from whatever errand had taken them to town. When she did open her eyes, drawn by some change in the air or the light, or just a feeling, the first thing she saw was impossible. A single point of golden light, hovering about 3 feet to the left. Then another blink of light, and another, until there were half a dozen of them dancing in the darkness. Maggie found herself walking down the porch steps without deciding to move, drawn forward by wonder and disbelief and something that felt almost like hope. She walked into the field, and the fireflies seemed to part around her like water, then close in again, surrounding her with their gentle light. More lights were appearing now, dozens of them, hundreds, flickering on and off in a rhythm that seemed almost purposeful. The air was filled with the particular sweetness of a southern summer night, a smell Maggie had tried to forget and never quite managed to. The whole world had become a constellation of soft gold stars, close enough to touch. Where did you come from? She watched it go, then stood very still, letting the lights wash over her like a blessing. Time seemed to move differently in the presence of such beauty, stretching and contracting in ways that defied the ticking of any clock. But gradually, she became aware that the lights were moving with purpose. They were drifting, slowly but surely, toward the back of the property, toward the woods. Maggie knew those woods. She'd spent countless hours exploring them as a child, following the creek, climbing the old oak trees, building forts out of fallen branches and imagination. There was a path, overgrown now probably, that led deep into the heart of the forest. She and Tommy used to follow it on summer afternoons, seeing how far they could go before the dinner bell called them home. Without quite deciding to, Maggie found herself following the fireflies. They seemed to be leading her, staying just ahead, beckoning her forward. She should go back, get a flashlight at least. She was barefoot, underprepared, following insects into the woods in the dark like someone in a fairy tale who's about to learn a hard lesson. But something pulled her forward, a feeling she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The fireflies wanted to show her something. The thought was ridiculous, impossible, but she believed it anyway. She took a deep breath and stepped into the woods. The woods welcomed her with cool darkness and the smell of leaf mold and moss. The canopy overhead blocked out most of the stars, but the fireflies provided their own illumination. Maggie walked carefully, feeling her way as much with her feet as her eyes. The forest floor was soft with decades of fallen leaves, and her bare feet found it surprisingly gentle. The sounds of the night changed as she went deeper. The cicadas faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the trickle of water somewhere nearby. The creek. She was getting close to the creek. She could hear it now, that particular music of water moving over stones, a sound that was buried deep in her memory. The fireflies were getting brighter, congregating ahead of her in numbers that made the path ahead glow. Maggie rounded a bend in the trail and stopped short. Before her was a clearing she remembered, a place where the creek widened into a shallow pool before continuing its journey through the woods. The same flat rock still jutted out over the water, the one she and Tommy used to sit on, dangling their feet in the cool water and telling each other secrets. The clearing was full of fireflies, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, covering every surface like living stars. They clung to the tree trunks and branches, they hovered over the water, they filled the air with gold. The light they produced was bright enough to see by, bright enough to turn night into a kind of twilight. And standing in the middle of it all, looking at her with an expression somewhere between surprise and inevitability, was Tommy Richardson. He looked different. Of course he did. 27 years had passed. The boy she'd known had been 17, all sharp angles and nervous energy and dreams too big for Firefly Hollow to contain. The man standing before her was 44, the same age as her, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was holding something in his hands. A mason jar, full of light. Maggie took a step forward, then another. They stared at each other across the clearing, across the years, while the fireflies danced between them. Maggie spoke. He laughed. a sound she remembered so clearly it made her chest ache. I am. I just. Aunt Caroline wrote to me. About the house. Caroline. Yeah, she told me you might come. You still talk to Aunt Caroline? Someone has to check on her. Make sure she's eating something besides pimento cheese and sweet tea. She talks about you a lot, you know. Follows your career. She's real proud of you, even if she doesn't say it to your face. I should have visited more. Should have called. Should-haves don't count for much. He looked down at the jar in his hands, then back up at her. He smiled, that lopsided smile she remembered. I come here sometimes, in the summer, to remember, and to make sure they come back. The fireflies. Yeah. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them, and Maggie could see that his eyes were the same, that particular shade of brown that looked gold in certain light. That his eyes were the same, that particular shade of brown that looked gold in certain light. The fireflies were the souls of the hollow, the light of all the people who'd ever lived here and loved this place. Your grandmother's story. She said that's why they came back every summer. To check on us. To make sure we were okay. I used to think it was just a nice story. Something to tell kids to make the world seem less scary. But after you left, after your parents, the fireflies stopped coming. Everyone said it was ecology, climate change, pesticides, all the scientific reasons. But you didn't believe that. No. He unscrewed the lid of the jar and tilted it, and the fireflies inside lifted out in a small cloud of light, rejoining their fellows in the trees. I thought maybe your grandmother was right, that the light had gone out of this place because you took it with you when you left. Maggie felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes again. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and solid and real. I'm not blaming you. I never blamed you. He smiled, that lopsided smile she remembered. That's all the light left, and it's here now. The fireflies surrounding them seemed to pulse brighter, their collective glow intensifying until the clearing was as bright as dawn. Maggie caught her breath at the beauty of it, at the impossible magic of this moment. She squeezed Tommy's hand, and he squeezed back, and they stood together in the light, two middle-aged people finding their way back to the children they'd been. I tried to bring them back. Every summer I'd come out here and catch a few, keep them for a night, then let them go, hoping it would encourage them to stay. The population grew, slowly, but it was never like it used to be, never like when you were here. And tonight? It worked, kind of. The population grew, slowly, but it was never like it used to be, never like when you were here. Then I saw you walking through the trees, following them, and I understood. They were waiting for you to come home. It should have sounded crazy. Fireflies didn't wait for people. But standing in that clearing, surrounded by more light than should have been possible, Maggie found that she believed him. Or at least, she wanted to believe him. After so many years of living in a world that made sense, of following rules and logic and evidence, she wanted to believe in something magical again. I don't know if I'm home. I don't know if I can stay. He's not asking you to stay. I'm just asking you to be here now. That's enough. So she was. She stood with Tommy in the clearing by the creek, holding his hand, watching the fireflies dance. And slowly, carefully, they started to talk. Not about the big things at first, but about the small ones. About his job teaching biology at the regional high school, about his divorce 5 years ago, about the house he'd built on the other side of the hollow with his own 2 hands, about her apartment in Chicago, her work, the cases she won and the ones she lost, the way the city looked from her office window on a clear day. The cases she won and the ones she lost, the way the city looked from her office window on a clear day. They talked about Aunt Caroline, about the town, about who had stayed and who had left and who had come back. They talked about the things that had changed and the things that hadn't. As they walked back to the creek, the firefly's light leading the way. And as the last light disappeared into the night, they stood there, holding hands, the world around them still and quiet. They talked until the fireflies began to dim, their biological clocks telling them that dawn was coming even though the sky was still dark. When the first firefly winked out, Tommy released her hand. "I should get you back to the house. You must be exhausted." "Yeah. Can we do this again? Come out here, watch the fireflies. Every night you're here. For as long as you want." They walked back through the woods together, following the path by memory and the last of the fireflies' light. When they emerged from the trees, the farmhouse was a dark shape against the slightly lighter sky, patient and waiting. Tommy walked her to the porch, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. "Get some sleep. And Maggie, I'm glad you came back, even if it's just for a little while." "Me too." She watched him walk to his truck, parked further down the drive where she hadn't noticed it earlier. He raised a hand in farewell as he pulled away, and she waved back, standing on the porch until his taillights disappeared around the bend. The house was dark and quiet when she stepped inside. She found her suitcase still sitting by the front door where she dropped it. She carried it upstairs to her old room, too tired now to do more than brush her teeth at the ancient bathroom sink and pull on a t-shirt to sleep in. The bed was soft and familiar, and Maggie sank into it with a sigh of relief. Through the open window, she could hear the last of the night's sounds, a distant owl, the rustle of wind through the leaves, the endless song of the cicadas. And underneath it all, so faint she might have imagined it, the sound of water moving over stones. She closed her eyes and let sleep pull her down into darkness, down into dreams where the fireflies were waiting. The ceiling was wrong, the light was wrong, the sounds filtering in from outside were all wrong. The smell of coffee was real. She could hear someone moving around downstairs, the clink of dishes and the creak of floorboards. Maggie grabbed a pair of jeans from her suitcase and pulled them on, then padded downstairs in her bare feet, following her nose. Aunt Caroline was in the kitchen, looking exactly like Maggie remembered and nothing like her at the same time. She'd always been small, but she seemed to have shrunk further, becoming almost bird-like. Her white hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd always worn, and her hands, pouring coffee, were gnarled with arthritis but still steady. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said without turning around. "Figured you'd sleep late after your drive. Coffee's fresh. There's eggs if you want them." "Aunt Caroline." Maggie crossed the kitchen and wrapped her arms around the old woman, carefully, afraid she might break. "You didn't have to come all the way out here. Aunt Caroline, can't have you rattling around in this old house all by yourself. Besides, Tommy called me this morning, said you'd be needing a proper breakfast." So Maggie sat at the old wooden table, the same one she'd eaten 1,000 meals at as a child, and drank coffee from a chipped mug with faded flowers on it, and told her great-aunt about her life in the city. Caroline listened while she scrambled eggs and fried bacon and made toast, asking questions now and then, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Sounds like a good life. Didn't ask if you were successful. Asked if you were happy. I'm successful. I have a good career. Didn't ask if you were happy. Asked if you were happy. I don't know if happiness is really the point. I have a good life. That should be enough. Should be isn't the same as is. Your mama used to say the same thing, that she had a good life, that she was fine, right up until the day she wasn't." "Aunt Caroline, I know. We don't talk about it. Well, maybe it's time we did. You were 17 when it happened. Old enough to understand, but too young to really process it. And then you left, and you never came back, and we let you go because we thought that's what you needed. But maybe we were wrong. I don't know what you want me to say. Want you to listen. Your parents loved each other. Loved you. Loved this place. But they were restless, both of them. Always looking for something just over the horizon. Some version of life that was better than the one they had. That's why they were always driving somewhere. Always chasing something. Maggie knew this. She'd grown up with parents who were physically present, but mentally always halfway to somewhere else. They'd loved her in their distracted way, but she'd never quite felt like enough to make them want to stay still. The night of the accident, they were coming back from Atlanta. Your daddy had some business meeting, some opportunity that was going to change everything. It never did, of course. Those things never do. But they believed in it, so off they went. It was raining. The roads were slick. They took a curve too fast, and that was that. Over in a moment. I know how it happened. The trooper told me. But did anyone ever tell you it wasn't your fault? Of course it wasn't my fault. I wasn't even there. Not directly. But I saw it in your eyes at the funeral. I see it now, in the way you hold yourself like you're carrying something heavy. You think if you'd been enough, if you'd been the right kind of daughter, they wouldn't have been always looking somewhere else. They would have stayed home that night, and they'd still be alive. The words hit Maggie like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She opened her mouth to deny it, to say that was ridiculous, that she'd never thought that. Because Caroline was right. Somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd never examined too closely, Maggie had been carrying that weight for 27 years. The terrible, irrational guilt of the child who believes that love should be enough to keep people safe. It wasn't your fault, honey. Your parents were who they were. They loved you as best they could, but they were broken in their own ways, looking for things that don't exist. And when they died, it was because of rain and speed and bad luck. Nothing more. Nothing you could have prevented. Maggie felt the tears coming again, but she didn't try to stop them this time. She let them fall, hot tracks down her cheeks, while Caroline held her hand and made soft, soothing sounds. It was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that's been waiting years to get out. When it finally subsided, Maggie felt hollowed out but somehow lighter, like she'd been carrying a stone in her chest, and had finally set it down. I'm sorry. I don't know where that came from. Don't apologize for feeling things. You've been holding that in too long. Caroline squeezed her hand once more, then let go. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold, and then I want you to tell me what you're going to do with this house. Maggie picked up her fork obediently, surprised to find that her appetite had returned. I could sell it, I guess, or rent it out, or you could keep it. And do what with it? I can't live here. My job, my life, everything is in Chicago. Or is Chicago just where you've been hiding? Maggie didn't have an answer for that. After breakfast, Caroline shooed her out of the kitchen, insisting on doing the dishes herself. Maggie wandered through the house, really looking at it for the first time in the daylight. The bones were good, solid, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't find anymore. But it needed work. The floors needed refinishing, the walls needed paint. Several of the windows had developed a haze between the panes that suggested the seals had failed. The kitchen and bathrooms were hopelessly outdated, straight out of 1985. But none of it was unfixable. With time and money and effort, the house could be beautiful again, could be a home again. The thought surprised her. When had she started thinking of it as a potential home rather than a relic of the past? She found herself back in her old bedroom, standing at the window that looked out over the back of the property. She could see the field, bright green in the morning sun, and beyond it the dark line of trees. Somewhere in there was the clearing and the creek and the flat rock where she and Tommy had spent so many summer afternoons. The mason jar still sat on the nightstand. Maggie picked it up and turned it over in her hands. It was just a jar, glass and metal, ordinary and utilitarian. But it had held so much light once. So many small, perfect moments of beauty. She made a decision then, standing in that sun-filled room with the jar in her hands. She didn't know what it would mean in the long term, didn't know how it would work or if it even could work. But she knew what she needed to do next. Maggie went downstairs and found Caroline in the living room, pulling the dust covers off the furniture with brisk, efficient movements. I'm going to stay, for the summer, at least. See if I remember how this place works. Caroline turned to look at her, a smile spreading across her weathered face. Good. That's real good, honey. The house will be happy to have you. Houses don't have feelings, Aunt Caroline. Don't they? This one's been waiting for 27 years. I'd say that takes a certain amount of feeling. I need to call my office. Figure out how to work remotely for a while. and I should probably get the utilities turned on in my name, and all that can wait. First, you should probably get cleaned up and put on some shoes. Tommy'll be by around lunchtime. Because I invited him. Figured you two have some catching up to do. Besides, he knows this house better than anyone except me. If you're serious about fixing it up, you'll need his help. Maggie should have been annoyed at the manipulation, but she found she didn't mind. The idea of seeing Tommy again, in the daylight, when she wasn't emotionally exhausted and overwhelmed, sent a small flutter through her stomach. She spent the morning making phone calls and sending emails, explaining to her firm that she needed to take a leave of absence for family reasons. Her boss was understanding, even supportive. She had months of unused vacation time built up, and the firm had been pushing for more flexible work arrangements anyway. They could set her up with remote access to the necessary files, and she could handle her ongoing cases via email and video conference for a while. It was easier than it should have been. Maybe that said something about how necessary she really was. Or maybe it said something about how much of her life she'd built around work, using it as a bulwark against having to think too hard about anything else. Tommy arrived exactly at noon, pulling up in the same pickup truck from the night before. Maggie watched from the window as he got out, carrying a toolbox in one hand and a cardboard box in the other. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. She met him at the door, suddenly self-conscious about her own appearance. She'd showered and changed into clean clothes, but she hadn't worn makeup or done anything special with her hair. In Chicago, she never left her apartment without being fully put together. He held out the cardboard box. "For tonight," he explained. Maggie felt something warm bloom in her chest. Also brought his tools. "Caroline said you might want to take a look at what needs fixing around here. Thought I could help you make a list, maybe give you some estimates." Caroline made sandwiches for lunch, and they ate on the porch, watching the afternoon unfold slow and golden over the fields. Tommy told stories about his students, about the hilarity and heartbreak of teaching teenagers about the natural world when most of them were more interested in their phones. Maggie told him about some of her cases, the ones that had meant something, the few that had reminded her why she'd wanted to be a lawyer in the first place. "You're good at what you do," Tommy said. It wasn't a question. "I am. I worked hard to get good at it." "But you don't love it." Maggie paused, a bite of sandwich halfway to her mouth. "That's the second time today someone's pointed out that I'm not happy with my life. Is it that obvious?" "Only to people who know you. Or knew you, anyway." The Maggie I knew wanted to be a teacher. Elementary school. She loved kids, loved the idea of helping them discover the world. People change. Dreams change. Yeah, they do. But you didn't change dreams. You abandoned them. There's a difference. After your parents died, you decided that the things you wanted didn't matter as much as being safe. And safe meant successful, which meant law school and the big city and a life where you were in control of everything. And she'd built a life so solid and secure that nothing could shake it. But she didn't feel safe. She felt isolated and exhausted, and like she was living someone else's life. "I don't know how to be that person anymore," she said quietly. The one who had dreams instead of plans. "It's been too long." "Has it?" "You could have ignored the letter. Could have sent someone else to deal with the house. But you drove 11 hours to be here. That doesn't sound like someone who's forgotten how to follow their heart." Before Maggie could respond, Caroline came out onto the porch. He turned to Maggie. He left. After he left, Maggie helped Caroline clean up the kitchen, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. As they worked, Caroline hummed an old hymn, the same one Maggie's grandmother used to hum. "He's still in love with you, you know." Maggie nearly dropped it. Some things don't change just because time passes. That boy loved you then, and he loves you now. "Aunt Caroline, this house is yours now, honey. You need to spend some time here, alone, figure out how you fit in it. You and Tommy don't need an old lady chaperoning your Firefly watching. Alone in the house, Maggie found herself at loose ends. Here was the piano her grandmother used to play, out of tune now, but still dignified. Here was the bookshelf full of old hardcovers, the kind with cloth covers and gold lettering. Here was the coat closet that had always smelled like mothballs and her grandfather's pipe tobacco. She ended up back in her bedroom, sitting on the bed with her laptop, trying to answer work emails. But her mind kept drifting to the window, to the afternoon light slanting across the fields, to the line of trees in the distance. She gave up on work and lay back against the pillows, letting her eyes close, just for a moment. When she woke, the light had changed. The sun was lower, painting the room in shades of amber and gold. Maggie checked her phone and was surprised to find she'd slept for nearly 2 hours. She got up and splashed water on her face, then headed downstairs. Through the front window, she could see Tommy's truck pulling into the drive. Her heart did that flutter thing again, and she smiled at her own reaction. 44 years old and getting butterflies over a boy, though Tommy Richardson was definitely not a boy anymore. She grabbed one of the mason jars from the box he'd brought and met him on the porch. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They walked across the yard as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple. The air was cooling, the heat of the day giving way to the comfortable warmth of a summer evening. Maggie was acutely aware of Tommy walking beside her, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. She wondered if it would be strange to take his hand, to close that small distance. They'd held hands last night, but that had felt different, charged with the emotion of the moment and the magic of the fireflies. This was just them, just Maggie and Tommy, walking through a field in the fading light. "Can I ask you something?" Maggie said. "Anything. Why did you stay?" "In Firefly Hollow, I mean. You were so smart, Tommy. You could have gone anywhere, done anything. You used to talk about going to college in California, studying marine biology, living by the ocean. But you came back here." Tommy was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the path ahead. "I did go to California. You see, Santa Cruz. Got my degree in biology, spent 4 years living 10 minutes from the beach. It was everything I thought I wanted." "So what happened?" He gestured around them, at the fields and the trees and the hills rolling away into the distance. "For the way the light looks at sunset. For knowing the names of every bird and insect and plant. For the pace of life, slow enough to actually notice things. I tried to explain it to my friends in California, but they didn't get it. They thought I was crazy to want to come back to a place with one stoplight and more cows than people. But you did anyway." "Yeah, got my teaching certificate, came back, got a job at the high school, built my house, made a life. I'm not going to lie and say I never wondered what if. What if I'd stayed in California? What if I pursued research instead of teaching? What if I'd been bolder and braver and more ambitious? But this is where I'm supposed to be. I know that now. Because I'm happy. Not every day, not every minute. But fundamentally, down in my bones, I'm content with the life I've built. That's worth more than any amount of success or money or prestige." "How do you know?" "Because I know now, down in my bones, I'm content with the life I've built. That's worth more than any amount of success or money or prestige." "Is that true for you? In Chicago?" Maggie wanted to say yes, wanted to defend the life she'd built, the choices she'd made. But standing here in the golden light with Tommy looking at her like he could see straight through to her heart, she couldn't lie. "No, it's not." They'd reached the edge of the woods. The path stretched ahead of them into shadow, but Maggie could already see the first fireflies beginning to appear, golden sparks in the gathering dusk. The path stretched ahead of them into shadow, but Maggie could already see the first fireflies beginning to appear, golden sparks in the gathering dusk. The forest was coming alive around them, the night shift taking over from the day. The clearing, when they reached it, was already glowing with fireflies, not as many as last night, but still a beautiful, magical sight. Not as many as last night, but still a beautiful, magical sight. The little lights danced over the water and through the branches, painting the darkness with gold. Maggie unscrewed the lid of her mason jar and held it out, waiting. She didn't have to wait long. A firefly landed on the rim of the jar, its light pulsing, then crawled inside. Then another, and another. The night had already begun to fall, but the fireflies continued to appear, dancing in the jar, a tiny, golden, magical light. Soon she had half a dozen of them, their collective glow bright enough to illuminate her face. She looked over at Tommy and found him watching her instead of the fireflies. What she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. Just, you look happy. Really happy. It's good to see. Maggie looked down at her jar, at the lights dancing inside it. I am happy. Right now, in this moment, I'm happy. Then hold on to it. Remember what it feels like. And when you go back to Chicago, if you go back, take that feeling with you. Use it as a compass. If you're not feeling even a little bit of this, you're going in the wrong direction. They sat on the flat rock, their feet dangling over the water, jars of fireflies in their laps. The creek babbled its eternal song, and the night wrapped around them like a blanket. Maggie leaned her head on Tommy's shoulder, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. He went very still for a moment, then relaxed, his arm coming up to rest lightly around her waist. I'm scared, Maggie admitted. Of changing, of staying, of going back, of all of it. That's okay. Being scared means you're about to do something that matters. When did you get so wise? Years of listening to teenagers' problems. You either develop wisdom or go crazy. Sometimes both. Maggie laughed, and the sound echoed across the water. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fireflies, listening to the night. Eventually, Maggie unscrewed the lid of her jar and tilted it, watching the fireflies lift out and rejoin their fellows. Tommy did the same with his own jar. We should head back. It's getting late. But neither of them moved. Not yet. They sat a little longer, stealing these extra minutes, unwilling to let the evening end. Finally, they stood up and made their way back through the woods. At the edge of the trees, where the path opened onto the field, Tommy stopped. Maggie, I want to say something, and I don't want you to feel like you have to respond or that I'm putting pressure on you. If you want that. Maggie looked up at him, at his kind eyes and his familiar face, at this man who'd once been a boy she loved. Tommy, I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am anymore, or where I belong. I can't make you promises when I'm this confused. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just letting you know where I stand, so you don't have to wonder. He smiled, that crooked smile that made her stomach flip. They crossed the field together under a sky full of stars, the farmhouse a dark shape ahead of them. At the porch steps, Tommy paused. Good night, Maggie. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she agreed. She watched him drive away, then went inside. The house was quiet and dark, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting, patient and expectant, to see what she would do next. Maggie climbed the stairs to her bedroom, changed into pajamas, and got into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind was too full, spinning with thoughts and feelings and possibilities. She kept thinking about what Tommy had said, about using happiness as a compass, about the fact that she'd smiled more in the past 2 days than she had in the past 2 years. Something was shifting inside her, some tectonic plate of her soul moving into a new position. She could feel the change happening, could feel the old certainties cracking and falling away. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Through the open window, she could see the faint glow of fireflies in the field. She got out of bed and went to the window, kneeling on the floor to watch them. They moved through the darkness like living stars, like hope made visible. She thought about her parents, about the way they'd always been chasing something they couldn't name. She'd spent her whole adult life being the opposite of them, staying in one place, building something solid and permanent. But maybe she'd overcorrected. Maybe there was a middle ground between their restless searching and her rigid stability. Maybe home wasn't a place you stayed forever or a place you left behind. Maybe it was a place you could return to again and again, finding something new each time. The thoughts settled into her chest, warm and solid and right. Maggie went back to bed, and this time, sleep came easily, pulling her down into dreams full of light. The pet. Mornings, Maggie would work on her laptop, handling cases remotely, talking to clients and colleagues via video conference. Afternoons, she worked on the house. With Tommy's help, she made a plan for the renovations. Sometimes she could do things herself, painting walls, refinishing floors, clearing out the overgrown garden. Other things required professionals, updating the electrical, replacing the roof, modernizing the plumbing. The physical work was satisfying in a way her legal work never had been. At the end of a day spent sanding floors or pulling weeds, she could see what she'd accomplished. Evenings, she and Tommy would walk out to the clearing to watch the fireflies. Sometimes they talked for hours, covering everything from their childhoods to their philosophies on life. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, just being together in the presence of beauty. The fireflies came every night, faithful and constant, lighting up the darkness. And slowly, imperceptibly, Maggie began to heal. The tight, anxious feeling she'd carried in her chest for years started to loosen. The constant mental chatter about what she should be doing, where she should be, who she should become, began to quiet. She started sleeping through the night without medication. Started eating meals because she was hungry instead of because the clock said it was time. Started noticing things. The way the morning light came through the kitchen window, the particular green of the kudzu, the sound of rain on the old roof. Caroline came by often, bringing food and company and her particular brand of wisdom disguised as casual conversation. Other people from town started showing up too, people who remembered Maggie as a child, who wanted to welcome her back. Mrs. Henderson from the general store. Pastor Williams from the Methodist church her grandmother had attended. A steady stream of neighbors bringing casseroles and pies and their own memories of the house, of her family, of the way things used to be. But gradually, she realized that what felt intrusive was actually something she'd been missing: connection. 3 weeks into her stay, Tommy invited her to dinner at his house. He picked her up at sunset, and they drove through the winding roads of the hollow to the other side of the valley. His house was beautiful, modern but not aggressively so, with big windows that looked out over the hills and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. He'd built it himself, he told her, over the course of 3 years, working weekends and summers. Every board and nail was placed with intention, with care. "It's amazing," Maggie said, standing in the living room, looking out at the view. "Well, I had help with some of the technical stuff. But yeah, mostly it was me. I wanted to create something. Something that would last, that would be mine. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. Dinner was simple but delicious. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, salad from his garden. They ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. Tommy told her about his plans for the property, the garden he wanted to expand, the workshop he wanted to build. Maggie found herself envious of his certainty, his clear vision for his life. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever regret not getting married again? Having kids?" "Sometimes. When I see my students with their parents, or when I'm at a family gathering and I'm the odd one out. But mostly no. I was married for 8 years. We tried to make it work, but we wanted different things. She wanted to move to Nashville, have a big social life, keep up with the Joneses. I wanted this. So we split up, amicably, and she got the life she wanted and I got mine. And kids? I have my students. Hundreds of them over the years. I know it's not the same, but it's a kind of fatherhood. I get to watch them learn and grow, get to be part of their lives in a meaningful way. That's enough for me. Is it? Technically, yes. But realistically, I don't know. I don't even have a partner, and even if I met someone tomorrow, by the time we got to the kids stage, I'd be pushing 50. I think that ship has sailed. Maybe. Or maybe you're just on a different timeline than you expected. Life doesn't always follow the schedule we set for it. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I just don't want you to close doors in your mind because you think it's too late. It's never too late to start over. After dinner, they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cooling night air, and talked until the stars came out. Maggie told him about the cases she was working on, the frustration of trying to help people who sometimes couldn't be helped. Tommy told her about his students, the ones who struggled and the ones who thrived, the small victories that made the hard days worthwhile. When he took her home, he walked her to the door like they were teenagers on a first date. They stood on the porch, the house dark behind her, the night alive with cricket song around them. I had a really good time tonight. Me too. Something warm and hopeful was blooming in her chest, something she was afraid to examine too closely in case it disappeared. Inside, the house felt different, more like a home and less like a museum. The Casso house looking better every day. The walls were freshly painted, the floors refinished to a warm honey glow. She'd kept the old furniture, restoring what could be saved, replacing only what was beyond repair. The result was a house that honored its past while being livable in the present. She made herself a cup of tea and carried it upstairs to her bedroom. The mason jar still sat on the nightstand, but it wasn't empty anymore. Inside was a single firefly she'd caught that evening, its light pulsing steadily in the dark. She sat on the bed and watched it glow, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few weeks. Thinking about Tommy and Caroline and the house and the fireflies. Thinking about Chicago and her career and the life she'd built there. Thinking about what she wanted versus what she thought she should want. The firefly's light pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. On-off, a rhythm as old as summer itself. Maggie made a decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, didn't know how it would all work out. But it felt right, in the way Tommy had described, down in her bones. In the morning, she would call her firm and tell them she wasn't coming back. She would resign, effective immediately. She'd built up enough savings that she could afford to take some time, figure out her next steps without the pressure of bills. Maybe she'd open a practice here, something small and local, helping people with wills and property disputes and the everyday legal needs of a small community. Or maybe she'd do something entirely different, something she hadn't thought of yet. All she knew for certain was that she was staying. Not just for the summer, but for good. She was coming home. The decision settled into her like a stone finding the bottom of a well. Final. Right. Maggie unscrewed the lid of the jar and watched the firefly lift out, circling the room once before finding its way to the open window. It hovered there for a moment, its light pulsing, then flew out into the night, joining its fellows in the darkness. She watched it go, a smile on her face, and knew that she was finally free. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Maggie had to arrange the logistics of leaving Chicago, terminating her lease, packing up her apartment, shipping her belongings south. There were exit interviews with her firm, awkward conversations where she tried to explain why she was leaving a prestigious position to move to a town they'd never heard of. Most of her colleagues thought she was crazy. A few understood, or at least pretended to. Her closest friend at the firm, Sarah, helped her pack up her office. "I'm going to miss you," Sarah said, "but I'm also kind of jealous. You're actually doing it. Actually changing your life instead of just talking about it." "It's terrifying," Maggie admitted. "The best things usually are." While Maggie handled the Chicago end of things, Tommy and Caroline worked on the house. Contractors came and went, fixing the roof, updating the wiring, modernizing the bathrooms while keeping their vintage charm. The kitchen got new appliances but kept its farmhouse sink and butcher block counters. Slowly, surely, the house was coming back to life. Maggie drove back to Chicago once to oversee the packing and handle some final business. The city felt different to her now, too loud and too fast. She'd lived there for 15 years, but it already felt like someone else's life. She walked through her apartment, boxing up her possessions, and was struck by how little of it felt truly hers. The furniture was nice, but generic. The art on the walls was chosen to match the decor, not because it meant anything to her. The only things she lingered over were a few photos and the books on her shelves, the novels and poetry collections that had been her companions through long, lonely nights. She was packing these books when she came across a slim volume of Emily Dickinson, the same edition she'd had as a teenager. It had been a gift from her mother, one of the few things she'd taken with her when she left Firefly Hollow. She opened it to a random page and read, "I dwell in possibility, backslash. A fairer house than prose, backslash. More numerous of windows, backslash. Superior for doors." The words caught her breath. A fairer house than prose. More numerous of windows. Superior for doors. She'd been dwelling in prose, in the practical and the provable, for so long. But possibility was calling her back, opening windows and doors she'd thought were closed forever. She tucked the book into her personal bag, the one she'd carry back to Tennessee, and kept packing. Back in Firefly Hollow, summer was reaching its peak. The days were long and hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned afternoon into a languid dream. Maggie spent her mornings working on the house and her afternoons in the creek, cooling off in the shallow pools. Sometimes Tommy would join her, and they'd sit on the flat rock with their feet in the water, talking about everything and nothing. Their relationship was deepening, growing roots. They hadn't defined it, hadn't put labels on what they were to each other. But there was an understanding between them, a comfort and ease that felt like coming home. Tommy would reach for her hand while they walked, and it felt natural. Maggie would lean against him while they watched the fireflies, and it felt right. One evening, about 6 weeks into her stay, Tommy suggested they take a picnic to the clearing. He packed a basket with fried chicken and potato salad and sweet tea, and they walked out to the creek as the sun was setting. The clearing was already glowing with fireflies, more than Maggie had ever seen. The air itself seemed to sparkle with their light. They spread a blanket on the grass and ate while the darkness settled in around them. The food was delicious, the company better. After they finished eating, they lay back on the blanket and looked up at the stars through the canopy of trees, the fireflies dancing around them like terrestrial constellations. "Maggie," Tommy said softly, "I love you. I know it's fast, or maybe not fast considering I've loved you since we were kids, but I need you to know, I'm in love with you." Maggie turned her head to look at him. His face was serious, vulnerable, open. "I love you too. I think I've been in love with you since I got here. Maybe before that. Maybe I never stopped." He turned toward her, cupping her face in his hand. Yeah? When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. It felt like all the summers of their youth and all the possibilities of their future wrapped up in one perfect moment. The fireflies glowed brighter around them, as if celebrating, and Maggie thought maybe Caroline was right. Maybe this place did have feelings. Maybe it had been waiting for this, for them to find their way back to each other. "Tell me about your house." So Tommy told her about the workshop he wanted to build, where he could make furniture in the winter months when school was out. About the expanded garden where he wanted to grow more of his own food. About the possibility of getting some chickens, maybe a goat or two. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you want? For the farmhouse? For your life?" "I want to fix up the house, make it beautiful again. But not just as a place for me to live. I want it to be a gathering place, like it used to be when my grandparents were alive. I want Sunday dinners with friends and neighbors. I want the kind of home where people feel welcome." That sounds perfect. And professionally, I'm thinking about opening a practice. Nothing fancy, just a small office in town. Help people with legal issues, make it affordable for folks who couldn't otherwise afford a lawyer. Do some pro bono work. Make a difference in a way I never could at the firm. "You're going to be amazing." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good. That means it matters." He kissed her forehead. And you won't be doing it alone. You've got Caroline and me and this whole town. We take care of our own here. Our own. The words settled warm in Maggie's chest. She was one of them again. She belonged. They stayed in the clearing until late, reluctant to let the evening end. When they finally packed up and walked back through the woods, the farmhouse was waiting, its windows glowing with the lights Maggie had left on. It looked like a home. Her home. At the door, Tommy kissed her goodnight, a long, slow kiss that promised more evenings like this, more summers watching the fireflies, more of whatever this was between them. Maggie heard herself say, "Stay? You don't have to go." Tommy searched her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He stayed. They climbed the stairs to her bedroom, to the room where she'd spent her childhood summers, and they came together with a tenderness and passion that felt both new and timeless. They came together with a tenderness and passion that felt both new and timeless. "I never thought I'd be back here. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Outside, the fireflies were still dancing, still glowing, still reminding her that even in the darkest night, there was light to be found. The moving truck arrived on a Thursday in late July. Maggie stood in the driveway with Tommy and Caroline, watching as the movers unloaded the carefully packed boxes that held the last 15 years of her life. It was strange seeing her Chicago belongings here in Tennessee, like two different worlds colliding. But as the day wore on and things found their places, it started to make sense. Her books filled the shelves in the living room. Her clothes hung in the closet upstairs. Her coffee maker, which had made 1,000 hurried cups in her Chicago kitchen, found a new home on the farmhouse counter. That evening, after the movers had left and Caroline had gone home, Maggie and Tommy walked through the house together, looking at what she'd done. "It's perfect," Tommy said. "It's home," Maggie corrected. They ended up on the porch swing, watching the fireflies appear in the darkening field. "I've been thinking," Tommy said. "Okay, I know we're taking things slow, and that's good. That's right. We both have our own homes, our own lives. But I want you to know that I'm all in, wherever it goes. I'm committed." "So am I. I didn't come back for a summer fling, Tommy. I came back because something was missing in my life. And I found it. I found you, and this place, and a version of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. Good, because I'm not letting you go again. Not ever." They rocked on the swing, wrapped in each other and the warm night air, watching the fireflies paint the darkness with gold. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The creek murmured its eternal song. The world was exactly as it should be. August brought thunderstorms, the kind that rolled through the hollow in the late afternoon, all purple clouds and lightning and rain that came down in sheets. Maggie loved these storms. She'd sit on the covered porch and watch them pass, smelling the ozone and rain-soaked earth, feeling the temperature drop as the storm washed away the heat of the day. One afternoon, she was working on paperwork for her new practice when the sky opened up. She abandoned her laptop and went to the porch, drawn by the drama of the weather. The rain was so heavy she could barely see the road, and lightning strobed across the sky, followed by thunder that rattled the windows. She was standing at the porch railing, watching the storm, when she saw headlights coming up the drive. Tommy's truck. He parked and ran for the porch, getting soaked in the few seconds it took to cover the distance. He was laughing when he reached her, his hair plastered to his head, his shirt clinging to his shoulders. "What are you doing here?" Maggie asked, laughing too. "You're drenched." "I was driving home from school, and the storm hit. Your place was closer. Plus I wanted to see you. You see me every day. And yet it's never enough." "Hi." "Hi yourself." She found him one of her father's old shirts, something she'd kept packed away in a closet. It was surreal seeing Tommy in it, this physical connection between the past and the present. He changed in the bathroom while she made hot tea, and they settled on the couch together, listening to the rain drum on the roof. "I love storms. Always have. There's something cleansing about them. They wash everything clean, make the world new again. That's poetic for a science teacher. Science is poetry. Just poetry written in equations and observations instead of verse. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos, then handed it to her. On the screen was a picture of a small storefront, brick with big windows, in what Maggie recognized as downtown Firefly Hollow. The perfect size for a law office. I want to see you succeed. Want to see you build the life you want here. He took her hand. Yes, I'm ready. Her first client was Mrs. Henderson from the general store, who needed help with her will. Her second was a young couple trying to buy their first house and confused by all the paperwork. Her third was a man fighting a bad insurance claim. Word spread quickly in a small town, and soon Maggie was busier than she'd ever been in Chicago, but in a different way. This work felt personal, meaningful. She was helping people she knew, people who were becoming her friends and neighbors. She was making a real difference in their lives. On the day she won her first case, a settlement for a client who'd been injured on the job, Tommy took her out to celebrate. They drove to the next town over and had dinner at the nicest restaurant around, toasting her success with champagne. I'm proud of you. We did it. Built a whole new life from scratch. We couldn't have done any of this without you. Without Caroline, without this town, without the Fireflies showing me the way home. To Fireflies then, and to coming home. 6 months ago, she'd been miserable in Chicago, successful but hollow. Now she was in a small Tennessee town, running a modest law practice out of a tiny office, and she'd never been happier. After dinner, they drove back to Firefly Hollow and walked out to the clearing, even though it was September now and the nights were getting cooler. The fireflies were fewer than they'd been in the height of summer, their season winding down. But they were still there, still glowing, still dancing their ancient dance. They'll be gone soon. They'll be back. As they stood there wrapped in each other's arms, a single firefly landed on Maggie's hand. Its light pulsed once, twice, 3 times, then it lifted off and flew away, joining its fellows in the darkness. Maggie watched it go, a smile on her face. The light would return. It always did. All you had to do was wait, and believe, and keep your eyes open for the magic that was always there, hiding in the darkness, waiting to be found. Winter came to Firefly Hollow with a gentleness that surprised Maggie. She'd expected something harsh, having spent too many years enduring Chicago's brutal cold. But here, winter was a soft thing, all misty mornings and bare trees and the occasional dusting of snow that turned the hills into something from a postcard. She and Tommy fell into new rhythms. Friday nights were for dinners at her place, elaborate meals they'd cook together while listening to music and talking about their weeks. Saturday mornings were for sleeping in and lazy breakfasts. Sunday afternoons were for visits with Caroline, who'd moved into a retirement community in town but still insisted on cooking for them at least once a week. Maggie's practice was thriving. She'd hired a part-time assistant, a recent college grad named Amy who was smart and eager and reminded Maggie of her younger self. Together they handled the steady stream of clients that came through their door, people with real problems that Maggie could actually help solve. It was satisfying work, the kind that let her sleep soundly at night. Tommy's teaching filled his days, and Maggie loved hearing his stories about his students. The freshman who was terrified of frogs but fascinated by snakes. The senior who decided to major in environmental science because of something Tommy had taught her. The quiet kid in the back who'd suddenly blossomed when they started the unit on astronomy. "You're a good teacher," Maggie told him one evening as they sat by her fireplace, the flames dancing and crackling. "You change lives." "So do you," Tommy countered. "The work you're doing, helping people who couldn't otherwise afford legal help, that's changing lives too." They smiled at each other across the space between them, and Maggie felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what happiness felt like. Not the bright, flashy kind, but the steady, sustainable kind. The kind that lasted. In February, on Valentine's Day, Tommy cooked her dinner at his house. He'd gone all out. Candles, flowers, a menu that must have taken him all day to prepare. They ate slowly, savoring each course, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. After dinner, he took her hand and led her out to the porch. It was cold, but he'd set up a heat lamp and there were blankets piled on the chairs. "Maggie," he said, his voice soft, "I have something for you." He pulled out a small box from his pocket, and Maggie's heart started pounding. She knew what this was. She'd been half expecting it, half hoping for it, even as part of her was terrified by what it meant. "I know we haven't been together that long, and I know you've built a life here, a good life, and you might not want to change anything. But I also know that I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So I'm asking, hoping, that you'll marry me. That's the ring my grandmother left me, told me to give to the woman who made my heart light up. That's you, Maggie. You're my light." Tears were streaming down Maggie's face, but she was smiling. He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her while the stars looked down and the universe approved. They were married in May, in the clearing by the creek, surrounded by family and friends, and what felt like a million fireflies, even though it was barely dusk and still a bit early in the season for them. Caroline stood up with Maggie, her eyes bright with happy tears. Tommy's best friend from college stood up with him. Pastor Williams officiated, keeping it simple and heartfelt. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the fireflies lifted into the air in a cloud of golden light, swirling around them like a blessing. People gasped and pointed, and someone said it was a sign, a good omen. Maggie thought they were right. The reception was at the farmhouse, the yard filled with tables and lights and music. They danced under the stars, Maggie and Tommy, while their friends and neighbors celebrated around them. Caroline gave a toast that made everyone cry. Tommy's mother welcomed Maggie to the family with a hug that felt like coming home. Later, when the party was winding down and people were starting to leave, Maggie and Tommy slipped away to the porch. They sat on the swing, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and watched the last of their guests drive away. Happier than I knew was possible," Maggie said. "Thank you for finding me, for bringing me home. Thank you for coming back, for giving us a chance." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, until the last car had gone and they were alone with the night and the fireflies and each other. "Ready to start our life together." "I thought we already had," Maggie said. "Fair point. Ready to continue our life together. Always." They went inside hand in hand, closing the door on their wedding day and opening it on all the days to come. The house welcomed them, warm and solid and full of light. Through the windows, they could see the fireflies still dancing in the yard, keeping their eternal vigil, lighting up the darkness with their patient, persistent glow. And Maggie knew, down in her bones, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because the path had been easy, but because she'd had the courage to follow it. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. She'd come home to Firefly Hollow. And in coming home, she'd found herself. Found love. Found light in the darkness. The fireflies had shown her the way. And they'd always be there, every summer, reminding her that magic was real. That home was waiting. That the light always comes back. Thank you so much for listening to this story tonight. I hope it brought you a little bit of peace, a little bit of light in the darkness. If Maggie and Tommy's journey touched your heart, if you felt the glow of those fireflies, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to Lantern Lake Stories for more tales like this one. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more quiet evenings we can share together. And if you'd like to support the channel, a simple like or comment means the world. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, or tell me your own story of coming home. Wherever you are in the world, whatever darkness you might be facing, I hope you remember, the light always comes back. You just have to wait for it, believe in it, and keep your eyes open for the magic. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.